So it's now a time for our first Turning the Dial panel discussion titled Future Readiness, and will be hosted by Mary Phaeton. Now, you met Mary just briefly during the In Conversation with Adam, but I thought I would just take a moment to allow you to get to know her just a little better. So Mary is one of Perth's most sought-after interviewers and panel facilitators, and you got a taste of why that is the case. Formerly a producer of news and current affairs radio at ABC Perth, Mary now focuses on climate-related events and conversations. She is the founder of WA Climate Leaders, a cross-sector network that drives leadership in the West Australian business and across industry to accelerate emissions reduction and climate action. It's now over to Mary to welcome the panellists up and take over the next session.
Thanks very much for that, Josh. Everyone grab a mic because I notice we do need to have them right in front of us before. So obviously in this panel discussion, we have the chance to hear more from Adam Carroll from the Climate and Sustainability Group at EY and Karen Monaghan from Our Kinds. But also we have an introduction to Tim Richards, who's Managing Director of Richgrow. So Richgrow has a commitment to sustainable product and practice and a zero carbon footprint. And I think it would be great to invite Tim to actually share a quick overview of the aspects of their commitment to sustainability and net zero before we start our conversation. So over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Mary. Am I close enough there to the mic? Yep, good. So, yes, thank you for having me along. So, a little snapshot about us. My great-grandfather started the business in 1916, so we've been around a fair while. We've seen a few iterations of the business, if you like. Started out as stock feed suppliers, dealing mainly with the agriculture sector. Worked a lot with chicken farmers, piggeries, dairy farms, that sort of stuff as well. My father saw an opportunity in the 1960s for retail garden products. Back then, it was more a case if you knew a farm, you'd grab a bag of soup or go get some manure or something like that to throw in your garden. So he took the opportunity to literally get back then 100-pound sacks of NPK blues or supers and stuff like that and put them in little bags, tie them up with a bit of string. Plastic bags are probably not that environmentally sustainable, but it's what it was done. And it kind of just snowballed and grew from there. So we still supply into the landscape sector as well as ag, hort, everything as well. But trying to stay on task with the sustainability side, we were faced with about a $60,000 a month electricity bill. So clearly we started looking at, so I'm going back to about early 2010, 11, 12, around there. So we started looking clearly at wind and solar, like everyone. But in our market sector, we started seeing what's called anaerobic digestion. Some of you, I know definitely some of you know about it. I've spoken to you about it. But essentially, we divert food waste from landfill. So we've been diverting organics since probably the 1960s in terms of manures, wood residues, all the ingredients to make our products. So we were quite well versed in that. We were already taking a smaller amount of food waste for composting. But what we do now is we take up to 150 tonne a day of food waste from the likes of food producers, their byproducts, supermarket waste, that sort of thing. We put it in big tanks. Each digester is 2.5 million litres. We have two of them. So it's like a 5 million litre stomach. Think of it as a gut, if you like. And we feed it with food waste. But by doing that, it's diverting it from landfill. We capture the methane that's generated. We take that methane off. This is very simplistic. Run big generators. Just turn a big alternator and produce electricity. So we can produce, we have two generators, each one's 1.2 meg of electricity production. And we put all that power into the grid. We've been totally off the grid as a company now since 2015 when we commissioned the plant. So, and the excess power we produce on top of that goes into the grid. And we can produce enough to power up to about 4,000 homes. So that's a very quick overview of us and kind of why I'm here as part of this panel today. So we're heavily invested, and I suppose it is a bit of a misnomer that everyone's like, oh, I'm going to divert my food waste and everything. It's going to add cost to my business and that. It's actually not. Our gate fees are cheaper than landfill. So you guys can, well, not all of you, but those that are producing waste and in a quandary about how you're going to do it, a little bit of effort at the front end to segregate from your general waste streams, you can actually save a lot of money. And in my instance, you can then promote that your food waste is now going in to produce green electricity. So it's a good marketing tool as well. So,
Thank you, Tim. I do want to sit with you just for a sec because I didn't hear you say at any stage that you were worried about climate change. And I think it's really interesting to hear the mindset that can lead to sustainable practices. It doesn't have to be because you're worried about anything, but because you can see that there's an economic benefit as well. So have you been concerned about climate issues?
Big time. Essentially what we've done as a business is divert things, organic matter from landfill for certainly as long as I've been alive. And paid to put my hand up and say that. It was perceived a dirty word if you were saying. I've been harping on and preaching what we do for a long, long time, and I'm not afraid to admit it. So climate's bigger. I want to see future generations have the great life that we're all used to here, but we
next hear a little bit more kind of that led you to decide our clients, because seeing a problem doesn't necessarily all people to step up to solution as it has.
I think Adam and have both touched on it well. It's for your children, and so I already had in my own. I haven't had a cup for about 10 years, and so that's when Tom came to me. And so those sensibilities with in my own home. When I realised that I could do that with what I had and combined with paint skills, no brainer, we'd just go as hard as we could. And what's interesting, what Tim has just said, is that I think I forgot to mention in my presentation that $50 a month the cafe pays, break even on that after they avoid 7 lids a day. Single use cup at the moment, 23 cents and going up at the moment. So it's a real economic model. Now, when we first go to speak to cafes, there's resistance in that they're like, I'm too busy, I can't do this, I can't make any money, it's going to cost me more, I'm going to need more room, I'm going to need more cups, I can't train my staff, I can't even recruit staff. It's just fear. Once they realise that it's a simple model and it can actually create ease for them and they can come and see it happening in some cafes, then they say, I'm doing this for my children, I'm doing this for my sector, and I'm doing it for the planet, and I'll save money. So that shift happens, and you probably have seen that as well, Tim. It's like once the penny drops, that it's not only for sustainability, but it's a sustainable business model, then all of the things they really want in their lives, the wants, start to overcome the needs.
And you've talked to me about how scalable Our Kinds is, and I wonder what the big vision is, because, this conversation is about future readiness. So for anyone who wants to be on the front foot of this concept, how else could it be utilised other than coffee cups, for example?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, we're busting to do cutlery, but you've got to grow with your own capacity. But we've already got cafes, and Good Sammy want to do that. Obviously, it could be used across agriculture as well. It could be used across medicine and food. When we started looking at it, we looked at blockchain very early because we realised that if we could measure it, then we could adjust faster. We could see what's working and what's not. We never realised at that stage we would be able to trade carbon in future. But we've set ourselves up to be able to record what we're doing in such a way that it will meet the requirements for carbon avoidance, which is harder than planting trees. So yes, it can be applied across lots of different circumstances, but the only way that you can go to scale fast is by keeping it simple. And so what you can see with our model is our business is subscriptions. We've worked out how we can support cafes and corporates, and we've worked out how we can do that with a small team, and how then we can grow that team. And so there is a model of paying for high-level experts. If you look at our website, you'll see we've got a killer team that we get a piece of this and a piece of that, and then they mentor interns, and then we buy in mid-strength as well. So once we get that model right, yeah, we can let it rip. The reason we can make it simple is because we divest ourselves of anything that is not our core business. So we're not trying to be another producer of cups. We're not trying to replace Good Sammy. We're actually creating a supply chain solution for Good Sammy. We're helping some Indigenous communities develop their own businesses, and it was great to meet the president of the Broome City Council here, because they're doing similar things up there. So the model was deliberately created to allow other businesses to thrive as our business thrives. And that's, I can hear in your sentiment as well. And you reflected on it a little bit in yours, like you have to do it together and you have to keep it simple.
Adam, I'd love to talk to you about the concept of the future, because I realise that within the corporate scenario, a CEO might last 5 to 7 years, I guess, on average. And so their concept of the future, and I guess even politically, the idea of the future for a particular government in power is not that far ahead. So we're talking about being future ready in terms of the kinds of transition that has to happen here. What are the mindset roadblocks that you're coming up against?
Interesting question. The corporate world thrives off a mythology of change. So if this was a corporate event right now, mark my words, someone would come up in the keynote, you've probably seen it 1,000 times, they give the change and disruption presentation. Oh my God, ChatGPT, digital data, everything's changing so fast, and change is so existential and persistent that we must disrupt ourselves. And it's all crap. And actually, the thing that makes the corporate world most remarkable today is the absence of change. And they're very good at peddling this story of change because it makes standing still look like a success. It makes a virtue out of survival. And the thing, so the thing that is most striking about the future, for which a lot of the corporate world is unprepared for, actually is change. And it isn't this narrative of this Silicon Valley-esque, we're constantly failing forward. That's just one of the most stark mythologies of our time. And actually the world is kind of petrified of change. And I don't think we've been through a kind of 30-year period. And I know this sounds like ridiculous because we get fed so much stuff about how much the internet, et cetera, is changing our lives, but it's actually not really true. And even if you objectively take a 30-year chronology and pass it back a generation after generation, it's striking how little has changed. And in our country, if you look at ABS data from now to 20 years ago, it's a remarkably similar picture. Same companies digging out of the same holes, shipping to the same customers, financed with the same banks, informed with the same advisors. So really the great thing we have to deal with, I think, is actually living up to this credo of change and actually embracing it, because that's actually the thing that we haven't been seeing for years, which is why stories like this are so exciting and forums like this are so exciting. And I actually think the small to medium enterprise space is going to be a much greater incubator of change than the incumbent power structures of the corporate world, which are more like nation states than dynamic corporations in any.
So in that case, I want to ask you about leadership, because my theory is that you don't have to have a leader in the title to be showing leadership in wherever you are in the world and whatever you're trying to undertake. So in the context of this kind of corporate fear of change, can you cite an example of someone in a leadership role who's actually had the guts to do something? There
are examples, but it's striking that, generally speaking, and it could all be hype, but when you find someone that is the architect of change in the corporate model, it's either a founder-led business or it is a highly confident, opinionated CEO that's happy to, he or she are happy to kind of fail in that role. And Paul Polman is kind of always held up as the kind of perennial example. And then I think there's a lot of mythology built around that. He was formerly the CEO of Unilever, but he had his first analyst call after taking the role, and it was a first quarterly earnings update on Wall Street, and some plucky Deutsche grad asked him about some near-term metric. And in that moment, he was like, this is ridiculous. I'm running a multi-billion-dollar business. I'm tired of this nonsense of quarterly earnings updates, so I'm not going to do them anymore. So he stopped doing them, and his chairman panicked in that moment naturally. But the same thing he sort of said about this process to say, I'm not going to be beholden to my shareholders. My shareholders can follow the strategy I set, and he changed the whole registry of the business. Now, again, a bit of a kind of apocryphal story, but they're quite rare. And that's why we need, I'm trying to spit this out in one sentence so I don't monologue again, but it's that what we really need to catalyze change is the layer down from the CEOs of the world. We put too much in our heads about CEOs being the architect of change. And there's a whole vast horizontal layer of empowered, educated, compassionate, well-heeled people, millions of us that sit across the corporate world that stay in our lane and aren't agitators for change. And I think that's going to be the great kind of source of confidence and change.
Yeah, thank you. Tim, you've just been on a huge trip. How many time zones did you say you'd been in?
I was away 30 days and I did 21 flights and 16 time zone changes. I'm still trying to find out where the ground is.
But what was very interesting of what you said to me about that experience was understanding, like, if we have a context in Western Australia that I think is partly built on the fact that I think Western Australian exceptionalism is at an all-time high at the moment, and partly that's to do with how the pandemic has been dealt with. But we're not quite sure whether we're part of Australia anymore, let alone part of the world. And so I'm really interested to hear what you observed as a Western Australian going out into the kind of global space of your business on like how we fit into that landscape.
Great question. This is my opinion, so I'll just put that in inverted commas. We were probably one of the last adopters of this real recycling mandate as a state in Australia, right? Now, by that I mean, like for FOGO, for example, the green bin that a lot of us have at home now, has been done for a few years in certain parts of Australia, well before it got to WA. So that's not a bad thing, but we're leading in a lot of areas too. Like, for example, the whole single-use plastic bag thing. We are world leaders in that space. I mean, I couldn't believe it because I'm not used to plastic bags anymore. It's amazing. I don't know how many of you travelled recently, but certainly one of the places I went was America. It's friggin' plastic everywhere. They haven't changed. They've still got polystyrene cups. You know, we haven't seen them for 10 or 15 years in Australia. So where do we sit? I think we're certainly up there in some areas, but we're miles behind in others. Pretty obvious to me. Germany's probably the most advanced in terms of sustainability and recycling and diversion and all those sort of metrics. They're leading the space, and they started the journey before us. So one thing I've observed is they're second generation recyclers and diverters and everything like that. And it is honestly, it is second nature to them. So every event you go to a big trade show or anything like that, they don't have paper plates. It's like Josh mentioned today, we're going to be eating off proper knives and forks and crockery today. Well, there's actually nothing wrong with that because you're not throwing it in the bin afterwards. Yes, you've got to wash it, but you know, there's efficient ways of doing that now. But in Germany, to the point where they don't have PET bottles for their soft drinks, it's still glass, right? And they don't go off to get crushed, which I find amazing. They actually go off, they get washed, and they average 3 to 4 reuses of the bottle, right? So if you're on a big trade show, clearly I didn't have a German accent or anything like that, and the girl that served me had quite good English, and she said, sir, I need to charge you, I think it was €3 or €4 as a deposit on your glass container, right? But when you return it, I'll give you the money back, right? This is in the trade show. It's second nature for their citizens over there, but you're not going to dare throw it in the bin.
Mm.
You know, €3 or €4 is about $7 or $8 Aussie at the moment. So, so you go back and you put your bottle in the, and it's amazing. Like if you're drinking Diet Coke or Lift or whatever, there's a one for each type. You put it in there. Clearly it goes back to Coca-Cola Amatil or wherever it is over there doing it, and they wash them and reuse them. So that's just a tiny little example, but
So what do you think you brought to the conversation in among your US and European counterparts?
I think, speaking as a WA disciple and a resident of this wonderful state that we live in, we have a real opportunity to learn from others' mistakes, because I'm not saying Germany's perfect. They admit they've made mistakes. The US, it's almost 52 different countries there, because they're so loyal to their 52 states that some of them are. I think there's 6 states have mandated that it's illegal for food waste to go to landfill now, but others don't care still. It's a real cross section over there. There's some states that are way ahead of where we are, but there's others that are way behind us. You're looking at them in the rear view mirror. But we actually have an opportunity to learn. So instead of getting forums together where we try and think about our own solutions, I actually think we should be looking at what's being done around the world, what's failed. There's no point. We're already replicating some things that have gone wrong elsewhere and failed. So we're going to waste 2 or 3 years until we work out, that doesn't work. Why do we do that? But if we take our blinkers off and actually have a look around the world, a lot of the mistakes, because we're quite at the entry point of all of this, a lot of the mistakes have already been made, right? I'm not saying there's the perfect solution to everything yet. There's not that I've seen. But there's no point following a path of failure when you've got the opportunity to learn from that and follow something that, if it's not working, it certainly appears to be working better than something that's going to fail. And that's where I think we've got an opportunity. We should be looking outside of our blinkered little world here and seeing what the others are doing. I don't want to say that we shouldn't stifle imagination. WA is very good at that. When I look at my business, I always keep saying to my staff, there's a better way of doing everything. We've just got to find it. Yeah. Because if you stay still doing what you're doing now, you'll never move forward. Yeah. So it's the same in that space.
Karen, you have been nodding so hard. Man, yeah. So what are you in strong agreement with?
Strong agreement with, I think that what I know from startup world, and I've been launching little things for other people for a long time, is that you can become really attached to your own idea. And actually a lot of people don't want to look outside because they want to do it. They really want to do it, and they don't want to know that it's failed previously. But then the flip side of that is learn from that failing. So it only might have been one little pivot point within that. So you've just got to be savvy to that. Like, one of the things with Outkinds is we deliberately set ourselves up as an experiment, and, in our own conversations, we call it that. We don't call it that with investors because it freaks them out. So there's that. But I think the other thing with failure is that if you want innovation to come through, and push some of the dinosaurs out, and in the energy market, that's classic at the moment, where you've got a lot of money going into sustain industries that really need to change. And yet in WA, we've got air, we've got wind, water, and, I can't even think now. Sun. Plenty of it, and lots of innovation coming through. But it's expensive for them to fail, because the way that grants are set up, you have to prove it first and get paid later. Now that doesn't work when you're into your second startup like I am. You've already put your body and your house on the line, But you've learnt everything you need to learn to land a sustainable business. And, well, not everything, but a lot. And you can't get funding through government until you prove it, you know. And I've done that over and over and over. I did it in early childcare where we launched an early parenting store in Bondi Junction that everyone said, that won't work. And we took the cost of care from $1,000 per visit in an institution to $62.50 before revenue in that centre. Saw 8,000 families in a year, and 75% of the families were let in by men. And that couldn't be funded until it was proven. That was $500,000. That's peanuts to change a wicked problem. So there is a fundamental problem with the way grants funding is enabled, and I've been pleased to see there's a bit of a shift in one of the new grants that's come out where they're paying 50% up front. And I like to think it's because each time I get one of these applications, I go back and I say, thank you for thinking of us. We won't apply this time because it will take too long, we'll lose money, we may not get it right the way you want to, etc. So I think this big discussion around failure, investing, supporting, and being able to influence without authority. You're right. Leadership doesn't come with a title. Leadership comes with, you know, confidence, conviction, emotion, owning it. And, you know, when you've got that in someone, you've got a leader, and we have it in our interns, you know. So, yeah, we need a big shift. We need to stop the money going into models that don't work and allow some failure. But, yeah, do your research first. So failure's less expensive.
Sorry, you just touched on, just very quickly, sorry. You just touched on, we have the wind and the solar and everything here. We're the second windiest place on Earth, the WA coastline. Drive to Geraldton, no tree can grow straight. And we have more abundance of sunshine than just about anywhere. You drive through Germany and there are wind farms, and they've got barely any wind, right, everywhere as far as the eye can see. And it's subsidised. Farmers put them in a paddock. You only lose a relatively small footprint of your paddock, but you're generating a heap of electricity. And there's solar farms everywhere. Like, fantastic adoption of solar in households here in Western Australia, but we could go to another level. Germany is going to wholly solar and wind power by 2030. And I actually, as we were driving along, the gentleman I was with took me to the viewing platform of the largest coal mine in the world, right? And the ironic thing was, well, look into this huge hole in the ground. Surrounding this hole in the ground were wind turbines as far as the eye can see. And they've almost done that as an iconic sign that this is the past and this is the future. But by 2030, they're shutting all their coal mines.
I think there's a bit of a political issue with that at the moment. I'm not sure if I'm right about this, Adam, maybe you know, but I'm pretty sure that there's been a bit of backtracking on that lately.
With the whole Russia thing, definitely. They're very worried about power in Europe.
Yeah, but luckily they're so far on the front foot to start off with, right? With their future readiness. I've got a big question that I might have to repeat for each of you, but it came out of the Ag Zero 2050 conference that I went to yesterday, and I've kind of just reworked it for this group, which is about how SMEs need to think to defend and expand their competitive position and capture additional value from the net zero transition. Adam.
Sure. Well, first thing I got to say is that I speak with no authority from an SME perspective, because I work in sort of corporate advisory, which is about as abstract as you can get and away from the front line. But I think that one of the key ways is around, we have to get far sexier at selling this to the consumer. And traditionally, sustainability people have lived, we thought we were too intellectually pure and high and mighty and ivory tower to sort of slum it in the space of advertising and PR. And we really have to break that model, because there's so much opportunity to be able to really activate a consumer base around this. And I think SMEs are in a really good position to do it. Obviously, B2C ones more specifically. I look at, even in this state, in terms of the craft beer sector, and I see Shelter. I saw a Shelter t-shirt, and they're a fantastic archetype of this, where that community have been unafraid of alienating the traditional beer drinker and switching towards brands that are unashamedly progressive in their vocabulary and speak with confidence to the issues of sustainability. And it's really. I feel. I mean, I don't know, but I'd love to know. I think it's really cutting through. And if you look at that general asset class with, say, entities down south, or Garage Project in New Zealand being probably the best example, I think there's such a vast opportunity to turn consumers on about this. There will always be people that came out, say, with the plastic bag thing, to say you're going to hate people, you're going to alienate them, you're preaching to them, you're foisting your ideology upon them. But that's actually a tiny pocket of the community that are outraged by these things, and a massive proportion, I think, want to get involved. And I think we've barely scratched the surface of the ability to do this. And consumers that I see, they're not impressed by an entity saying, hey, we're carbon neutral or anything else. They are impressed when, by working with or acquiring that company's product, they feel as though they're actively participating in economic decarbonisation, and that they're a part of the problem. So it's not about you, the SME, it's about the extent to which you're empowering your consumer to participate in the grand challenges of our time around sustainable development. I think that is a necessary ingredient and a really exciting space for all SMEs, I think.
Yeah, and actually that is very much the story of both Rocky Ridge Brewing and of Hippie Kombucha, who we'll hear from tomorrow, but very much that story. So thank you. Tim?
Yeah, look...
would you like me to repeat the question, by the way?
Yeah, you can.
How do SMEs need to think to be able to defend and expand their competitive position and capture additional value from the net zero transition?
Education is the key thing. I'm a strong believer. We actually need to target our youth more, because generational change is what will make it happen. The older generation take this in the right light. I've got fathers and mothers and everything too, and a lot of people my age even are very stuck in their ways. And but I think there was a number was put up earlier. It might have been in your presentation. I'm not sure, that 16% of people were resistant to change. Yeah, it was you. I find that as about a bang on number from what we're doing. Contamination is a killer in what I do. It really is. And the majority, that 85, 90% want to genuinely do the right thing. Yet you got that 10, 15% that no matter what you say and do, no, I've done it like this forever, I'm just going to keep doing it. I can't be bothered with that. I'll just put anything in the bin sort of attitude. And it's almost you're beating your head against the wall trying to convert them, but we need to ensure that and that's what Germany have done. They're in their second generation of this, so it is honestly second nature to them. So we need to put a lot of focus into educating the young, because they drive mum and dad too when they get home. Yeah. Hey, mum, I got told at school you're not meant to be doing that. Mum gets the guilt and does the right thing. But it's amazing the influence they can have even on their parents.
Pester power's huge.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as the kid hears reusable over single step.
Yeah.
But it's,
and it is hard, but to me it's all about education, to not only just society, but especially to the next generation coming through. It's very important.
And the last word is for you, Karen.
So I think it's in the name of small to medium-sized enterprises. Like when you have small and medium-sized businesses, you have an opportunity to communicate more easily with your teams, to influence your teams, to grow leadership in your teams, and be agile. Listen. I'll never forget being at a barbecue a few years ago, and a lawyer was there, and he was bemoaning millennials. And I said, so how old are your client base now? And he's like, these millennials working for me, they won't listen to me. And my client base is dwindling. I'm like, how old's your client base? They were all millennials, right? So, not listening. The other thing, I'm from Victoria. I've come in and out of Perth over the last 3 years with COVID. And people keep saying this is the most isolated city in the world. You know, like I actually like the flight back to Melbourne because it's, 3 hours and you actually get to do something. You can nap, you can watch a movie, or you can read a book, or you can finish that project, that you've been trying to finish off. I don't think it's a massive blocker. It can be for supply chain, but I think what people don't own is that we're actually closer to more of the world's population than the East Coast. And that we don't have to keep shipping product around, but we can certainly ship intellect and agility and just like the brazen courage of Aussies, that have a crack. I think the world wants that now.
Yeah.
And I think I worked in Shanghai World Expo in 2010, and I understood then the value of being able to get clean food to the event that you're organising, and how compromised you are when you just can't do that one simple thing. I think that we've got a massive, massive audience out there, and we've just got to have that leadership and that courage to just reel them in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like tapping in on the West Australian leadership mindset of being, a bit frontier town, a bit kind of maverick, a bit of a risk take. If that's the case,
I know.
then who are you in this energy transition and this whole climate change and biodiversity saving transition that we're in? So
I call it renegade. I'm like, everyone, just be a renegade. Renegades are defiant, and defiance isn't a bad word. It's actually standing up for what you believe in. It's actually calling things out. They raised it in the occupational health and safety space years ago, when they had serious accidents in gas and in different mines, etc. And it was because there's a culture of not calling things out. We need to look at that in sustainability and in innovation. Give permission to people to speak.
yeah. Well, thank you all so much. That was incredible to hear your thoughts on future readiness. Please thank Adam Carroll, Tim Richards, and Karen Monaghan.